السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. لعل إيران نجحت أخيرا وبحكمة في تجنب الصراع العسكري المباشر من دولة إلى أخرى مع الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، واستعاضت عنه بشن حرب من نوع آخر تداعياتها أكثر ضررا على الوجود الأمريكي في منطقة غرب آسيا. هي هذه الحرب التي ستعيد تشكيل هذه المنطقة الملتهبة وصياغتها. مع أليستر كروك الدبلوماسي ومؤسس منتدى النزاعات ومديره نقرأ ذلك من الداخل. معكم زينب صفار، تابعوا. لعلنا نلاحظ في أعقاب المناخ الشبيه بالحرب الذي ساد بعد اغتيال الفريق قاسم سليماني قائد قوة القدس أن ما سبق هذا العمل الإجرامي بالتأكيد لن يكون كالذي سيليه، إذ شكل الهجوم على قاعدة عين الأسد نقطة البداية لعملية كبيرة وفقا لقول العميد حاج زادة قائد القوة الجوفضائية التابعة لحرس الثورة الإسلامية الإيرانية، ما أظهر بوضوح أن الإنجازات في أنظمة التوجيه الإيرانية سمحت بإطلاق الصواريخ بدقة بالغة. وباختصار، باتت قواعد الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية المنتشرة في جميع أنحاء المنطقة اليوم بنى أساسية معرضة للخطر وليس مواقع قوة. والآن استمعوا جيدا إلى الرسالة الإيرانية. في حال انسحاب الولايات المتحدة من العراق بناء على طلب البرلمان العراقي ووفقا لهذا الاتفاق مع حكومة بغداد وخروج قواتها من المنطقة، فمن شأن ذلك أن يخفف من حدة الحالة العسكرية. لكن في حال إصرار الولايات المتحدة على البقاء في العراق ستتعرض عندئذ القوات الأمريكية لضغوط سياسية وعسكرية لكي تنسحب، لكن ليست الجمهورية الإيرانية من سيمارس هذه الضغوط، بل سيمارسها سكان تلك الدول التي تنتشر فيها القوات الأمريكية حاليا. إيران لم تصل إلى النهاية، إذ تعتزم التصعيد لا التراجع، وبالتالي لم ينتهي الأمر. أليستر كروك من كبار الشخصيات في دبلوماسية الاتحاد الأوروبي سابقاً، وهو مؤسس منتدى النزاعات ومديره. ماذا يقول عن هذا التصعيد الذي يلوح في الأفق؟
It's certainly set to escalate unless America can, as you say, leave the region. But I think this whole exercise has given a very clear example of the bubble in which Washington lives, because it was thought in Washington by those that were advocating this murder of General Soleimani that it would send a shock through the leadership of Iran, splitting them off from the people, that the people would see them in disarray and would rise up against them. I mean, where on earth did they get this vision from? I don't know, but this is the vision.
Maybe the flawed intelligence.
Flawed intelligence, or also their inability to empathize with anyone else, to understand Iran, to understand the Chinese, to understand the Russians. They don't make that effort. They don't look at it, and they live within their worldview is within this bubble. In fact, it did something very different. It was this man was hugely popular. In not only in Iran, but in Iraq, and in, of course, Syria, because he was a real soldier that was on the ground, he was at the front line, always at the front line. He was charismatic, he was warm, he was with his soldiers all of the time, and he was popular amongst the young. He was a sort of football icon, like Ronaldo. I mean, with huge popularity. Iconic figure with huge popularity. I was in Iran and I heard the young loved him. And what it's done, really, in a sense, is glue back all the young back into the system, into the revolutionary structures again. You know, they weren't engaged in it in the way the older generation was. And now this is brought home to them, the conflicts,
So you
and
think,
that they're in part.
So you think that the assassination of General Soleimani did not serve the American aspirations?
Oh, just the opposite. I mean, I'm saying that what it's done is not only bring cohesion, not division to Iran, but more than that, it's created an image, and it's created the image of Imam Hussein and his sacrifice, and the sense, and I think in the vernacular you call it the victory of blood over the sword, but in the English perhaps you would say it was a victory of a spirit, over the sword, and that has electrified young people. So it's changed, and it's changed the politics of Iraq. And I've tried to say and explain to people a little in the West, and I say, you know, in Britain it's been hugely divided between people who wanted to remain in the European Union and those who wanted to Brexit. And they were fighting and fighting, and then an event happened. There was an election, and it settled. And Britain is now out of the European Union. It was as traumatic as that in changing the politics, the paradigm in Iraq. It's one of those fundamental moments. Yes, people were polarized. They still are, to extent, polarized in Iraq, but it changed the whole political paradigm in there and in the region. And so it's a major event that has taken place. And it's coupled with what you said, but which is not well understood, is that the security paradigm has changed completely too. All of these bases, this necklace of bases that have been built around Iran as a source of strength to threaten Iran and to put pressure on it, now become hostages to Iran, now become vulnerable to this new technology, to the system, in an asymmetric. I'm not talking about a country-to-country war, I'm talking about asymmetric war. This changes the pattern for Gulf states right throughout the region. The military edge, which was with the United States, has now turned to Iran. And Western NGOs say that. ISS say precisely that. The military edge has now shifted to Iran.
Towards Iran.
And that is a really significant event, because it will also frighten a lot of people. Frighten Israel, and it will frighten many of the Sunni states who had adhered to America and Israel and believing that this was an umbrella that gave them some sort of protection. And now that we're starting to see them hedging their bets and having to come to Iran, understanding that they need Iranian, if you like, cover as well as the cover.
Because they have some common interest, maybe in the Persian Sea, maybe in the different straits. They want their business, of course, to flow and not to come to a halt or to be under certain kind of problems. Yet what Trump needs most now in electoral campaign terms is a de-escalation with Iran. Why?
No, he doesn't need a de-escalation with Iran. He wants Iran on its knees, waving a white flag, because he wants that.
But you know, after the strikes of Ain al-Assad, you know, there was a kind of sort of, you say that, well, let's stand here and stop and not do any further escalation.
No, if there was that, I mean, it would have been different. But the conditions that, when they talk of Iran being a normal state, it means abandoning the revolution and abandoning everything that makes Iran what Iran is. And what they are talking about, essentially, and what Trump wants, is very clear. He wants to prove that the art of the deal policy that he's pursued around the world, the art of negotiations, can deliver North Korea and Iran, and that means that they will come and they'll ring him up and they will say, please, sir, can we have a deal in which we concede everything that you want from us and we become a normal Western-style nation, as you would like. It's never going to happen. And so, I mean, he talks in that way, but Iran is not going to pick up that phone and is not going to negotiate, because there's no trust in it, and it would be meaningless to do that after what has happened. There was an agreement. Who broke it? It wasn't Iran. In the first instance, it was the United States who walked away from the agreement. So there's a big problem of trust, but it's more than that. And I think it should be understood, because people keep talking about, oh, they'll get back to negotiation. They won't. I don't think in Iran there's any real sense there's a point now to having a negotiation. What for? I mean, they can go back to good terms, better terms with the West. Perhaps they would, we'll arrive there in a few years' time. But a nuclear deal, to go back and start all of that again, and then ballistic missiles, and then their good behavior, and human rights, and how they treat women, and their justice system, no one's going to go back into that negotiation.
We will come back to talk about Iran and how they perceive this, and why do the Iranians not fear the Americans. But allow me to ask you here about something very important, which is Karl Popper's hugely influential The Open Society and Its Enemies, which is a seminal dissertation which to a large extent has shaped how many Americans imagine their world. Popper's purpose was to propose that only liberal globalism would bring about a growing measure of humane and enlightened life and a free and open society. All this is but the outer, you said in one of your articles that it is the outer matryoshka, a suitable public rhetoric or a painted image that can be used to encase the secret inner dolls. What are those secret inner dolls in terms of Iran?
They're the elite. This is the elite that is tied very closely to the Israeli elite, that increasingly, and I would say this deliberately, has become much closer in terms of the way of thinking, of becoming much more, both of them much more, if you like, Old Testament in their thinking. The biblical prophecies of Israel as an empire, as a civilizational victory, Pax Judaica across the Middle East. So that is what it was. But what we're talking about is something much more profound in society. This was how to drive, if you like, the West towards this universalist system in which the elites can prosper and control and can manage the world and its people to do this. And the opposite pole to universalism and convergence on a single form is community. And that's why you see the struggles in Europe, in Britain, and in America, where people are trying to keep the sense that it's only out of community that you have esteem. You feel that you're valued as a person, that you have the moral narratives that shape you, that create you, to give you your path in life, came from community. So we have this deep struggle taking place in Europe between those who want a universalist, globalist vision of the future, where we all become more alike and perhaps become less aggressive according to that narrative, and people who value their history, their sense of who they are, but also the sense of having commonality with others that share the same narratives and the same idea of their past. This is important.
Right. Allow us, Alistair, to stop now for a short break, and then afterwards we're going to talk about more why American evangelists are so hostile in Iran, what's more lying beneath this kind of hostility, but after the break. إذن فاصل قصير ونعود، لا تذهبوا بعيدا. لعل العراق اليوم جاد بشأن مغادرة القوات الأمريكية البلاد، وعلى ما يبدو فإن تركيا تبعد نفسها عن مدار واشنطن أكثر من أي وقت مضى، وقد أظهرت إيران قدرات غير متوقعة بحسب المراقبين، فهل يصبح موطئ قدم الولايات المتحدة في المنطقة أكثر هشاشة؟ أليستر كروك مؤسس منتدى النزاعات ومديره يشرح ذلك أكثر.
Oh, Absolutely. I mean, may not even exist in some respects. It's precariously held a little bit in places like Lebanon, a little bit in the Gulf. But across, this is a really important change that is taking place because it enjoys the support of the people of Iraq and maybe well beyond. Yes, if America leaves that area, and this goes back to the point I was just making to you, because I remember some time ago the NATO leaders met together, I think in Washington, and they concluded that if the world stopped seeing the Western vision as their vision for the future, then it would be impossible to maintain the empire. It would be impossible. And people like Thomas Friedman always said, you know, our hold on the grasp of the world is on spreading McDonald's around the world. This is our civilization that we have to keep the empire, because without this vision, and if the vision goes, if the sense that this vision is collapsing, we won't be able to maintain. In other words, if you like, the cultural, the civilizational pillars are an essential part of empire. It's not just an incidental part, the military.
The building block.
The military is just one aspect. But for America, they understand that the cultural aspect are the central pillars of maintaining an empire.
But the US military security complex wants the Mideast energy dominance. It will not tolerate any threat to its dollarized financial weaponry advantage that a Russian-led mini Belt and Road might imply, and it will not allow Israel to fold.
I think that is clearly because Israel represents the Judeo-Christian vision. That's why I'm saying
one of the main pillars of their vision.
Yes, they can't let it fall, because then they would be completely. It would have been actually the reverse of the civilizational victory they won over the Soviet Union, over communism and socialism. Actually, then it would be the defeat of a civilizational victory if Israel failed. That's why they can't let it fall, apart from the electoral consequences for domestic US politics, which are also important as well. I mean, really significant. I mean, the evangelical support for Trump is really important. So it's both of that. Yes, it's both.
But when it comes, Alistair, to the JCPOA, Trump has dived in pretty deep, threatening the EU3 signatories to the JCPOA that unless they brand Iran as having defaulted on the JCPOA at the UN Security Council disputes mechanism, he will slap an eye-watering 25% tariff on their automobiles. Why did Trump do this? Why did he resort to this kind of threat?
It's very important in the view of the hard right in Washington and in Israel that it should go to the Security Council before October, because if Iran is still in compliance by October, then they are free to import weapons. The arms embargo on Iran is finished, according to the Security Council resolutions. So they were very keen to do that and take it to the Council. But the second aspect to it, which was equally important, was that almost certainly taking it to Security Council will result in the snapback of elections. It's been so constructed
of the sanctions.
It's been so constructed by Obama that it's not possible for China or Russia to veto this snapback. That's how it was made, and Obama is very proud of this structure, that they can't stop snapback if non-compliance is taken to the Security Council. They don't vote on it. It would only be that if everyone voted to suspend sanctions, that would continue. Otherwise, snapback is automatic. Doesn't get voted on, automatic. And then, of course, it means that it's now UN legal sanctions. And even though Russia and China, I'm sure, will intend to keep dealing with Iran, some of their companies who have exposure in America and elsewhere will be somewhat cautious about dealing with Iran, as well as other countries. So it's more of the same pressure, but I think primary reason is, of course, to prevent Iran acquiring weapons from Russia.
And would the EU3 or the EU as a whole kowtow to the American demands?
They have.
This is what they are going.
They've done it.
There's no way out.
They've done it. They've triggered the procedure, and then after a fixed period of time, it will be discussed in the disputes mechanism. And there's
resolution.
a short period, a limited period, a number of days, and then if that is not resolved, and it won't be resolved because they didn't do this for it to be resolved, it'll go to the Security Council. And then I think Iran will probably, at that point, leave the JCPOA.
Right. Today, does the regional uncertainty, instability play into Trump's 2020 agenda?
The instability caused by the declaration on Israel is entirely to do with his 2020 agenda, his electoral prospects, because something needs to be understood which is quite important. The evangelicals, people say, yes, but they're not going to vote Democratic.
Of course.
But 80% of evangelicals, 1 in every 4 Americans says they're evangelical. If they don't vote, if they just stay home, sit on their hands and don't go out, there are a number of swing states that Trump may lose. And don't forget, he will not probably win the popular vote in America. He lost 3 million by 3 million of the popular vote. He has to win in the Electoral College. So a decline in the turnout in the evangelicals could play a really important part in the American elections.
Right, Alasdair Crooke, former diplomat who was a senior figure in European Union diplomacy, founder and director of Conflicts Forum. Many thanks indeed for your in-depth insights.
Thank you so much.
Always welcome. والشكر لكم مشاهدينا الكرام على طيب المتابعة. للمزيد من التواصل تابعونا على صفحات السوشيال ميديا من كل فريق عمل البرنامج من كل الميادين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.